Let me ask you a question. How many times have you frozen your hands off on a chilly spring morning, found that one beautiful bank baking in the sun, cast your line, and caught absolutely nothing? I am guessing more times than you want to admit. We have all been told the same golden rule since we were kids. Fish the sunny banks in early spring because the water is warmer and the fish will be there. Well, what if I told you that following that old advice is exactly why you are going home with a dry net? Today, we are going to tear down one of the most stubborn myths in fishing. I will show you why chasing those sun-drenched shallows in early spring is a massive mistake. Let me know in the comments right now, have you ever wasted a whole day staring at a sunny bank without a single bite? Because by the end of this video, you will finally know why. Let us talk about where this whole idea came from. For decades, every fishing magazine, every older guy at the bait shop, and every weekend warrior has repeated the same mantra. When the ice melts and the water is cold, fish look for warmth. It makes perfect sense on paper. The sun hits the shallow dirt bank, the dirt heats up the water, and the fish swim over to get warm like lizards on a rock. Because of this, fishermen spend years doing the exact same thing every March and April. They launch the boat, ignore the shadows, and race straight to the northern banks that get the most southern exposure. But fishing is not played out on paper. It happens in real water, with real wind and real changing weather. The problem is that we took a tiny piece of science and turned it into a religion. We forgot to look at the bigger picture of what is actually happening under the surface. It is a classic case of doing what Grandpa did without asking if Grandpa actually caught anything on those days. Let us start by looking at the illusion of surface warmth. Picture this scene. You are out on the lake, the morning air is crisp, and the sun is finally cresting the trees. You find a nice shallow cove baking in the bright morning light. You dip your hand into the top few inches of the water, and it actually feels pleasantly warm. So you grab your favorite rod and start casting, fully expecting a monster bass to strike. But here is the massive flaw in that logic. You are only feeling the very top layer of the water column. In early spring, the sun's rays are simply not strong enough to heat the water all the way down to the bottom where the fish are actually resting. That warm water you feel is just a thin blanket sitting on top of an ice-cold mattress. Fish do not have the energy in cold water to swim all the way up to the surface just to sunbathe for a few minutes. They are hugging the bottom, belly to the mud, trying to conserve their energy. When you cast your lure into that shallow, sunny bank, your bait is swimming through warm water, but the fish are locked down in the freezing temperatures just a couple of feet below. It is a complete mismatch of location and expectation. You are fishing the sun, but the fish are ignoring it. Now we have to talk about the wind, which is the ultimate enemy of the sunny bank theory. Imagine you have found a quiet, sun-drenched stretch of shoreline. The water there has been warming up nicely for a couple of hours, but then, as it almost always happens, in the spring the wind picks up. It starts as a gentle breeze and quickly turns into a steady blow. Most fishermen think a little wind is great for a bite, and usually it is. But on an early spring sunny bank, that wind is actively destroying everything you are trying to fish. The wind pushes the surface water, creating waves that mix that thin, warm top layer with the freezing cold water from the main lake. Within just a matter of minutes, that tiny pocket of warmer water is completely erased. It gets churned up and washed away. So, while you are standing there casting into what you believe is a warm water paradise, you are actually fishing in a blender of cold water. The fish feel this temperature drop instantly. If they had moved up slightly to enjoy the warmth, that sudden rush of cold, mixed water sends them packing straight back to the deep, stable depths. The wind simply does not allow the sun to do its job properly in the early season. Another massive factor that everyone forgets is the brutal reality of freezing spring nights. Think about how many times you have planned a fishing trip based on a beautiful sunny forecast for Saturday. You get out there, the sun is shining, and you head straight for the shallow banks. What you completely ignored was the fact that the night before, the air temperature dropped near freezing. Water holds temperature reasonably well, but shallow water loses its heat incredibly fast when the sun goes down. All the warmth that the sun built up on Friday afternoon was completely sucked out of that shallow bank by Saturday morning. When you arrive at sunrise to fish that sunny spot, you are fishing the coldest water on the entire lake. It takes hours and hours of direct, high-angle sunlight to even begin replacing the heat that was lost overnight. By the time that bank actually becomes warmer than the rest of the lake, it is probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and you are already packing up to go home because you did not catch anything all morning. The nighttime temperatures dictate the morning bite much more than the morning sun does, and that is a harsh truth. Let us dive into the actual physical condition of the fish during the early spring. This is where the old grandpa logic really falls apart. People think fish act like humans. When we are cold, we walk across the room to stand by the heater. We assume fish will swim hundreds of yards from their deep wintering holes to reach a shallow, sunny bank. But fish are cold-blooded, and their metabolism in early spring is barely ticking over. They are completely lethargic. Imagine waking up in a freezing room under a heavy blanket. You are not going to sprint a marathon just to find a patch of sunlight on the floor. You are going to stay under the blanket and wait for the whole room to warm up. Fish operate the exact same way. They do not want to exert the precious little energy they have left after a long winter just to travel a long distance to a shallow flat that might get cold again in a few hours. They prefer stability over brief moments of warmth. They will stay near steep drops and deeper channels where the water temperature barely changes at all. They refuse to make that long horizontal journey to the sunny banks until the water temperature stabilizes over several consecutive days and nights. Let us talk about the specific types of banks that usually catch the most sun and why they are terrible for fishing. The banks that warm up the fastest in early spring are usually flat, shallow, muddy areas, especially at the very back of coves. Because they are shallow, the sun penetrates easily and warms the dark mud. On paper, this sounds amazing. But let us look at the reality of the situation. Think about casting your favorite jig or crankbait into a flat mud bank. What is missing? Cover. There are no deep rock crevices, no massive sunken trees, and no steep ledges for the fish to hide in or ambush prey from. You have a vast, barren wasteland of mud that just happens to be a degree or two warmer than the main lake. Fish, especially big predator fish, are incredibly vulnerable in shallow water without cover. They know that if they swim up onto that flat mud bank to get warm, they are exposed to birds from above and bigger fish from the deeper edges. Unless there is significant structural cover mixed in with that sunny, shallow mud, the big fish are simply going to avoid it. They would rather be slightly colder and completely safe in deep cover than warm and exposed on a flat, sunny bank. Now consider water clarity, which plays a huge trick on fishermen during the early spring. In many lakes and reservoirs, the water is exceptionally clear right after the ice melts, before the heavy spring rains arrive to muddy things up. So you pull up to your favorite sunny bank. The sun is blazing down and the water is crystal clear. You can see the bottom perfectly. It looks beautiful, but it is an absolute nightmare for fishing. Bright sunlight combined with clear, shallow water is the worst possible scenario for catching big, wary fish. When the sun is high and bright, there are no shadows for the fish to use for ambushing their food. Every single movement they make is highly visible. Furthermore, when you cast your lure, that thick fishing line, the bright hooks and the unnatural splash are magnified by the clear, sunlit water. The fish can see you standing in the boat from 50 feet away. They become incredibly spooky and suffer from severe lockjaw. In this situation, the sun is actually working against you. The warmth does not matter if the bright light is making the fish too terrified to open their mouths and take a bite of your perfectly presented bait. Let us examine the actual angle of the sun in the sky during the early spring months. This is a bit of science that completely breaks the old fishing myths. In the middle of summer, the sun is directly overhead, beating straight down into the water column and penetrating deep. But in early spring, the sun is still sitting quite low on the horizon. When the sunlight hits the water at a low angle, a huge percentage of that solar energy bounces right off the surface like a rock skipping across a pond. It simply does not penetrate the water efficiently. You might be standing on the deck of your boat, feeling the warm sun on your face, sweating in your heavy jacket, but the water is not absorbing that heat. The reflective nature of the water's surface at that specific angle means the sunny bank is not getting nearly as much thermal energy as you think it is. You are looking at a bank bathed in golden light, but underneath the surface, the temperature has not budged even a fraction of a degree. Trusting your eyes instead of a water thermometer in this situation is exactly why you end up casting for hours without feeling a single tug on the end of your fishing line. Another massive piece of the puzzle is the bait fish, the food source that the predator fish are actively looking for. The old theory says that bait fish move to the sunny banks to find warm water and zooplankton, and the big fish follow them. But early spring zooplankton blooms do not just happen instantly because the sun came out for 3 hours. It takes days of sustained warmth to trigger that food chain reaction. So when you pull up to that sunny, shallow bank, there is a very high chance that the baitfish are not even there. And if the baitfish are not there, you can bet your last dollar that the predator fish are not there either. Baitfish are often suspended in deeper water during the early spring, hovering over deep channels or holding tight to vertical rock walls that offer them protection. They are not recklessly swimming into shallow, clear water just to catch a tan. If you spend your whole morning stubbornly casting at a sun-drenched, muddy shoreline, you are fishing in an area completely devoid of the natural food source. You are throwing plastic lures into a biological desert, hoping a confused fish will happen to wander by. That is a terrible strategy for success. Here is a completely backwards concept that you need to understand. Sometimes the fish actively prefer the shaded banks in early spring. I know that sounds completely crazy, but let me explain. Think about a steep, rocky bluff wall that sits in the shade for most of the morning. That rock wall extends deep down into the water. Because it is steep, it offers instant access to deep water stability. A fish can move up just 2 feet to feed and then drop straight back down 20 feet into safety without expending any energy at all. Now contrast that with the flat, sunny bank where they have to swim 50 yards horizontally just to change depth. Furthermore, shaded banks often have darker water, which provides a sense of security. A big, old, smart fish feels much more comfortable sliding out from behind a boulder in the dark shadows than exposing itself in the bright sunlight. I have had days where I left the sunny, warm-looking banks completely untouched, went straight to the dark, freezing cold shade of a steep cliff, and caught absolute monsters. They were sitting in the dark because it offered them the structural advantages that the sunny, flat mud banks completely lack. Let us talk about the concept of thermal refuges and why fish seek stability over temporary heat. Imagine a fish sitting in deep water at a constant temperature of maybe 45 degrees. It is cold, but it is steady. That fish's body has adapted to that exact temperature. Now imagine a shallow, sunny bank where the water temperature violently swings from 38 degrees at dawn to 50 degrees by late afternoon, and then plummets back down at night. That kind of rapid temperature fluctuation is incredibly stressful on a cold-blooded animal. It shocks their system. They do not want to ride a temperature roller coaster every single day. They are seeking out thermal refuges, places where the water temperature is consistent and protected from the wild swings of the spring weather. Often these refuges are found on deeper channel swings, sunken roadbeds, or submerged points that are completely unaffected by the sun baking the surface. By ignoring the sunny, shallow banks and focusing your efforts on these deeper, stable zones, you are putting your bait exactly where the fish feel the most comfortable and the least stressed. And a comfortable fish is much more likely to eat. We really need to talk about the psychological trap that fishermen fall into every single spring. We are humans. We hate being cold. When we get out on the water after a long, miserable winter, we are desperate for sunshine. When we feel that sun hitting our heavy jackets, it feels amazing. It lifts our spirits, so we naturally gravitate towards the sunniest spots on the lake because that is where we want to be. We project our own human desires onto the fish. We look at a dark, shaded, windy point and think, that looks miserable, I do not want to go over there. Then we look at a calm, sunny cove and think, that looks beautiful, the fish must love it there. This is a massive mental error. The fish do not care if you forgot your thermal underwear. They do not care that you want to get a tan on your face. They are driven entirely by survival, energy conservation, and feeding efficiency. Every time you catch yourself steering the boat toward a sunny bank just because it looks comfortable for you, you need to stop and ask yourself if it actually makes biological sense for the fish to be there. More often than not, you are letting your own comfort ruin your fishing strategy. Let us compare muddy water and clear water when it comes to the sun, because this is where the rules can get very tricky. A lot of old-timers will tell you that muddy water heats up faster in the sun. This is absolutely true. The suspended dirt particles absorb the solar heat quickly. However, what they do not tell you is that muddy water in early spring is usually the result of cold spring rains. So you might find a muddy, sunny bank, and the surface might be getting warm, but the water itself is muddy because a freezing cold creek just washed a ton of frigid mud into the lake. You end up with a scenario where the sun is trying to heat up water that is fundamentally freezing at its core. Plus, muddy water blocks the sunlight from penetrating more than an inch or two. The heat stays trapped right on the very surface. So if a fish is sitting just 1 foot down in that muddy water, they are in the dark and they are freezing cold. You might see the sun shining brightly on that chocolate milk-colored water, but throwing your lure into it is a complete waste of time. The fish are avoiding that dirty, cold runoff, no matter how much sun is hitting the top of it. The impact of cold rain runoff is a huge reason why sunny banks fail, and it deserves its own deep dive. Spring weather is notorious for being unpredictable. You might get a week of beautiful sunny days, but it is often preceded by heavy, freezing downpours. When that cold rain hits the surrounding land, it flows straight down the hills and into the shallow banks of the lake. This creates an invisible barrier of freezing water right along the shoreline. Now, the sun comes out the next morning and hits that shallow bank. You look at it and think it is the perfect spot, but underneath the surface there is a constant, slow influx of ice-cold groundwater seeping into the lake from the saturated soil. The sun is fighting a losing battle against the freezing earth. The water near the bank might look inviting, but it is actually significantly colder than the water 50 yards out in the main lake, where the rain runoff has already dispersed. If you blindly follow the rule to fish the sunny bank, you are intentionally casting your bait into a hidden zone of freezing runoff water that every sensible fish in the lake evacuated 3 days ago when the rain started falling. You have to understand the difference between vertical movement and horizontal movement for early spring fish. This is the absolute key to finding them. As I mentioned earlier, horizontal movement takes a lot of energy. Swimming hundreds of feet across a flat bay to reach a sunny mudline is exhausting for a cold fish. Vertical movement, however, is effortless. A fish can alter its depth by simply adjusting its swim bladder, rising or sinking like an elevator with almost zero physical effort. Because of this, early spring fish will almost always position themselves in areas that offer extreme vertical changes. They want to be next to steep drop-offs, submerged cliffs, or old river channels. If the sun happens to warm the upper layer of the water column, they can simply float up a few feet, grab a passing baitfish, and sink right back down. They do not need a sunny bank to get warm, they just need the sun to hit the top of the deep water they are already living in. If you spend your time casting at flat, shallow banks, you are completely ignoring the vertical structure that the fish are actively using to survive the volatile spring temperature swings. Let us talk about the rocks, because not all sunny banks are created equal, and this is where many fishermen get confused. If you absolutely insist on fishing a sunny bank, you must pay attention to the rock composition. A sunny bank made of sand or mud is virtually useless early in the year. However, a sunny bank lined with massive, dark chunk rock or jagged boulders is a completely different story. Dark rocks absorb heat deeply and slowly radiate it back into the water, even after the sun goes behind a cloud. More importantly, those big rocks provide the essential cover and deep crevices that fish need to feel safe. The problem is that the old grandpa advice never made this distinction. The old rule was simply to fish the sun. So you see hundreds of boats pounding flat sandy beaches and muddy shorelines, catching absolutely nothing, while they completely ignore the steep, rocky transitions just a few hundred yards away. If the sunny bank does not have the right type of geological structure, the heat simply does not matter. Structure and cover will always trump a temporary bump in water temperature. If you forget this rule, you will go home empty-handed every time. There is a terrible timing trap associated with the sunny bank theory that completely ruins most fishing trips. Let us assume that a specific shallow bank actually does warm up enough to attract fish. When does that happen? It certainly does not happen at 9 o'clock in the morning. It takes the entire day of direct, intense sunlight to raise the water temperature in that shallow zone by just a couple of degrees. By the time that water is actually warm enough to draw the fish in, it is usually late afternoon, right around 4 or 5 o'clock. But what does the typical fisherman do? They rush to the sunny banks first thing in the morning, thrash the water to a foam for 3 hours, catch nothing, and decide the fish are not biting. Then they move out to deeper water, just as the shallow bank is finally starting to warm up. They are always in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you actually want to catch fish on a warming bank, you have to wait until the very end of the day. But by then the sun is dropping, the shadows are falling, and the bank is already starting to cool off again. The window of opportunity is so incredibly small that it is rarely worth the effort. We also have to consider the brutal combination of sunny skies and barometric pressure. Early spring is famous for massive weather fronts moving through. When a nasty cold front clears out, it usually leaves behind absolutely beautiful, cloudless, sunny skies. It looks like a perfect day to be on the water, but those clear blue skies are accompanied by a massive spike in barometric pressure. High pressure literally pushes down on the water and affects the fish's swim bladders. It makes them feel bloated, uncomfortable, and incredibly lazy. They hunker down tight to the bottom in deep cover and refuse to eat. So you have a situation where the sun is shining brightly on your favorite shallow bank, but the invisible high-pressure system has completely shut down the entire food chain. You are casting your heart out at a sunlit shoreline, completely unaware that the barometric pressure has put every fish in the lake into a state of lockjaw. The bright sun in this scenario is actually the ultimate warning sign that the fishing is going to be incredibly tough. You have to learn to read the invisible forces of nature rather than just blindly following the visible sunshine. Let us not forget the human element, specifically the curse of overfishing. Because the advice to fish the sunny banks is so famous, literally everyone on the lake is doing the exact same thing. Picture a crisp Saturday morning in March. You launch your boat and head for the best-looking, sunniest northern bank on the map. But when you get there, there are already 3 other boats lined up, pounding the water with spinnerbaits and jigs. Every fish in that shallow area has heard outboard motors, trolling motors, and splashing lures for the last 4 hours. Even if there were a few hungry fish that moved up into the sun to feed, they have been spooked out of their minds by the constant barrage of fishing pressure. They have retreated back into the deep water to get away from the noise. By sticking to the most obvious traditional advice, you are guaranteeing that you will be fishing the most crowded, pressured water on the entire lake. Sometimes, the best way to catch fish is to look at what every other boat is doing, and then go do the exact opposite. Leave the sunny community holes to the amateurs and go find quiet, unpressured water somewhere else. So, if the sunny banks are a trap, what is the alternative? The secret to early spring success is abandoning the flats and focusing entirely on transition zones. A transition zone is an area where shallow water meets deep water very quickly. Think of a point where a shallow spawning flat drops sharply off into an old, deep river channel. These areas are the absolute highways for early spring fish. They offer the fish the ability to slide up into shallower water if the conditions are right, but more importantly, they offer instant access to deep, stable water if a cold front rolls in or the wind kicks up. These transition zones often feature a mix of rock sizes from gravel to large boulders, providing excellent cover. You do not need the sun beating down on these spots for them to be productive. The fish use them as staging areas, waiting for the overall lake temperature to rise steadily over a period of weeks. If you position your boat over the deep water and cast up onto the edge of the drop-off, you are dragging your bait right past the faces of fish that are comfortably waiting for spring to truly arrive. This strategy relies on structure, not on sunshine. Bringing it all together requires you to change the way you look at the water and trust your modern instincts over old myths. We live in an era of incredible fishing technology. We have highly accurate sonar, water temperature gauges, and detailed contour maps. Yet fishermen will still ignore a massive school of fish sitting in 30 feet of water just because Grandpa said they should be in 2 feet of water getting a tan. You have to break the habit of visual fishing in the early spring. Stop looking above the surface at the sun, the trees, and the warm shorelines. Start looking below the surface. Find the hard bottom areas, locate the steep drop-offs, and pay attention to where the baitfish are actually holding. The fish are telling you a story every single time you go out, but you cannot hear it if you are too busy clinging to outdated rules. The next time you hit the lake on a freezing spring morning, look at that beautiful sunny mud bank, smile at the boats crowding around it, and drive right past them. Head to the steep, dark, rocky points and start dragging a jig on the bottom. You will be absolutely amazed at how much better your early spring fishing becomes. Let us sum up the reality of early spring fishing. The old rule of chasing the sunny banks is a broken strategy that relies on too many perfect conditions to actually work. We have learned that the sun cannot penetrate cold water fast enough, the wind destroys the warm layers, and freezing nights erase all the progress anyway. We have seen how fish prefer the safety and stability of deep water transitions and steep, rocky cover over the exposed, barren flats of a sunny shoreline. The biggest turning point for your fishing success will be the moment you stop treating early spring fish like sunbathing tourists and start treating them like survival experts. By focusing on vertical depth changes and solid rock structures, you are putting yourself in the strike zone instead of the dead zone. I promise you, once you break the habit of following the sun, your catch rate during those tough, cold months is going to skyrocket. Thank you so much for watching and taking the time to rethink your strategy with me. If this video opened your eyes to a new way of fishing, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share it with your fishing buddies. Now I have a question for you. What is the biggest fishing myth you used to believe until you finally figured out the truth? Drop your answer in the comments below and let us get a good discussion going. I will see you on the water.